Greg Gonzalez es uno de los grandes fenómenos del indie actual. Su banda, Cigarettes After Sex, estuvo en Bogotá y durante 2 noches seguidas agotó el aforo de Armando Music Hall, unas semanas antes de lanzar su más reciente álbum, Cry, que lo trae a este país y a otras regiones de América Latina, donde estará presentando su nueva canción, Heavenly. En esta conversación, Greg habla de su pasión por el metal, pero también de su curiosidad por el jazz, de cómo lo aburrieron en un principio las clases de música y cómo más adelante se convertiría él mismo en su propio profesor, para más adelante convertirse en uno de los fenómenos alternativos e independientes más importantes del momento. Greg Gonzalez de Cigarettes After Sex es mi invitado muy especial por Canal 13. It's good to have you in Bogotá.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Tell me all about your coming down here. How does it happen? Do you have any, as an artist, do artists have any idea how those things happen, or is it just a matter of, business and strategy and marketing?
I think for us, it's like we've been led all these amazing places. It seems like just from, pure fan interaction, the music getting to every place around the world and creating some kind of demand for us to actually come and show up and play the music live. So it feels actually kind of, it's never felt like promotional to me. It's always felt like, do you guys want to go there? Because I think a lot of times other bands don't come anywhere like around like a lot of places we go because they'll just feel like, we're not going to make much money or we're not going to do anything with that. And we're just like, yeah, we want to go to Bogota. Let's just go hang out there.
Yeah. Anyway, do you have any idea of because in these emerging independent markets where major labels still have such a lot of control over what people are listening to, and yet at the same time, you got a fan base and you're not on the radio, but you are on platforms.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of how many people comprise that listenership or those fans?
I think the only slight ideas we have is probably just based on whatever we can see on Spotify, our monthly listeners or something. But I'm sure that spread is, much bigger, because we have, in certain countries, it's like a lot of just YouTube listeners, like in India or something, which are a lot of fans there. And just, the fan, places where Spotify hasn't quite got to, or just, but it seems like we'd have kind of a very general idea. I don't know. So I'm probably saying no.
What's your take on streaming and on what's happening? Because on that front, it feels like such a good thing, to be able to be on the web and to listen to stuff that it wasn't available before for us, and yet at the same time, the money is just so small.
Yeah, it feels like the money thing needs to be adjusted heavily, just, it seems like we can do okay with it, but, just there's got to be more or something it's just such a new thing, I think, what streaming has done, that people are still trying to kind of grapple with what's fair. And it doesn't seem like it's maybe quite there yet, but I'm sure it'll get there.
Yeah. How many shows are there in your itinerary, in your schedule?
For this tour exactly?
Yeah.
Jesus, good question. It's off the top of my head, it's probably around 13 or maybe 15 or something like that.
Okay.
All through South America, and we did 3 in Mexico over the last week. So something like that. So these are a little harder because you're kind of flying it, every day and stuff like that. It makes the tours where we fly every day. You wouldn't think about it. I never really thought about this before, but being in airports every day is, I think, the most kind of mentally taxing thing.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, there's something about it. You would think, oh, it's fine, because before I would, go to an airport every so often, but if you're doing it every day, every morning, there's some kind of anxiety there that messes with you. So.
I know. I know. It's really hard to travel. People don't really understand how taxing it can be for a person, and especially for musicians who don't know where they're waking up every morning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still trying to have fun, so.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I'd like to discuss with you and to get people to know you better who are watching this show today or tonight or wherever it is that, whenever it is that they're going to be watching this show. And it's that, many musicians are going to be watching. You talk about your career and what you've done over the course of these years. And it's that when you come from the U.S., it seems as though everything that's happened for someone like you is taken for granted for young musicians, up-and-coming musicians in Latin America, whereas those of us who have been exposed to the American market know how hard it is. So it'd be nice to, take you back to your beginnings, to where you came from, how you started, and get those young kids to actually know that it doesn't matter where you are. It's hard being a musician.
Yeah, it takes the level of commitment I think it takes is kind of, it has to be like persistent beyond anything. It's pretty wild. I think that's my experience. Is persistence was like that separated, who was gonna get anywhere and who was just gonna kind of stay in limbo.
How old were you when you started?
When I really started playing music, I was like 10 years old. So I was very young, and I'd kind of been like, as a kid, I would play like kind of like my grandmother had like a little organ in the house or something. There'd be like little Casio keyboards lying around, before that. Just kind of like mess with those, just like play around with them. But when I got a guitar, I was about 10, and then I started immediately writing songs and learning songs.
Yeah, who gave it to you? Or did you get it?
Like there's like guitar, like my grandmother had like a guitar kind of lying around, and I think I maybe like played a little bit, and I thought this is kind of cool. So my parents bought me like a really cheap, like $100 acoustic nylon string guitar from like a local music store at that time, and put me in lessons. And I immediately hated lessons and just started learning records by ear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there records around the house? Was the family, fond of records? Did they collect any CDs or vinyl or?
Yeah, and actually, what's funny is that time it was all tapes for me. So, like it was tapes going into CDs.
Yeah.
And so, like, what was it like? I guess I'm thinking of like the stuff I learned immediately, and it was the music of the time for sure. It was songs like Enter Sandman and Smells Like Teen Spirit, and
You were into the grunge thing.
Exactly, because that was so big, and that was a great era for guitar because the songs were like really easy to learn too a lot, and they were great songs and whatever. But it was like super easy to learn, "Come as You Are," as a guitar student,
Yeah, I'd picture you listening to more alternative kind of stuff, like like the Sonic Youth kind of thing, and
I got into that later. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first started playing guitar, I was actually like a huge fan of Queen, but I found that their music was impossible to learn for me as a kid. And even still, I don't think I've really learned Queen. It's like Brian May was just such a genius. Like I just can't. Their music was so like it was just hard. It wasn't "Come as You Are." It wasn't "Smells Like Teen Spirit." It was like they were doing really like kind of classical kind of chord changes and stuff.
So you leave the music lessons, you leave the classes, and then what do? When you dedicate yourself to just learning the craft on your own?
No, like I still consider myself pretty social, so I started playing music, and I immediately found friends that wanted to play music in a band too. So we had garage bands immediately. I think when I was like 11 and 12, we would just, like my best friend at the time was like a bass player, so we'd just come over and jam on Metallica and Megadeth riffs and Slayer and stuff like that and whatever. And then I just found more friends that all wanted to play in metal bands and like kind of mess around with things.
It's funny that you started on metal and grunge, and you got this brand new album coming up in October, and it's so romantic and melancholy.
Yeah.
Why does that happen? I mean, why do you go that way when you're? Yeah,
that's true. I feel like I was always that person. I feel like I like respond to imagination, and the imagination I found in all those metal records. That was really exciting as a kid. Also, too, when you first start learning, I think you're intrigued by like virtuosity, and I was intrigued by just what these players could do. Like they were just amazing to see guitarists like Marty Friedman from Megadeth like play like these insane solos, or Kirk Hammett from Metallica, and I think I was really intrigued by just how virtuosic they were, and it was really good as a kid to learn that because it also gave me really good technique, I would say.
Of course.
Where I was able to kind of later in life play jazz and play like very like kind of styles that were tough for other players because they didn't have that background. Players that I knew that came from like punk backgrounds, they didn't have the chops to really like get into music like that, to play like in jazz groups or to play in like kind of anything. So I feel really thankful that metal gave me all that, like to gave me the technique like immediately.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. When do you get into jazz?
Jazz was in high school, and pretty much what happened is like my parents were like, "Well, you play music. Why don't you play music at school or something?" I was like, "Well, I guess so. I didn't really want to. I just was happy doing what I was doing then."
Does anyone in the family play any instruments, or is it?
No,
Just you?
No, just me. I mean, I come from a family that all loves music, but I was very much like an oddity. They didn't like they, I've had family members that kind of like tried a few things, like they kind of messed around with things, but no one was like a musician at all. So I wouldn't say I was like totally misunderstood, but I think my family's like, that's interesting that like there was just no like it was like unprecedented that I was gonna play music and I was so into it. But going back to the jazz thing, I got into that like in high school, and I found that I was just good at it, and I started playing jazz bass actually, and that led me to just start listening to jazz music in general and start to really appreciate it. And it was the same thing. It was very imaginative to me, like a lot of jazz records that I liked at the time. And same thing again, it was very virtuosic. I thought it's amazing these guys can just improvise all this music like that, and it was like another level away from Kirk Hammett. Marty Friedman was seen. Players like Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, Bill Evans, Miles Davis, Coltrane, like see those guys invent, music on the spot that was like so like beyond whatever I had seen before.
It's an interesting connection, the whole metal jazz thing.
For sure, they go together in some way.
they do. They do somehow. Here's another funny thing about metal and jazz that I've begun to think about over the course of a couple months, and it's that the more virtuosic it seems, the more you get a kick out of it without actually having to worry about what the lyrics say or what it's all about. I guess, the whole pop thing right now, which is so big and so huge, it's always been, but I feel like now more than ever before, we're bombarded by pop formula.
Yeah.
And it bores you, as a radio DJ, as a broadcaster, you have to do
it all day.
Yeah, you got to play the same things over and over again because it's just, the way it goes. It's just the way the business is. And then you seek shelter in things, in jazz. And it's funny that being so virtuosic, and filled with imagination, it just gives you, as a listener, the possibility to just escape, to just get away from it.
Yeah, and it was that too, just finding things that were new all the time. And I just found that I just always, the band has its sound now because I've decided that these are the deepest influences for me in the end. Like the way the band sounds is a result of a lot of searching to finally say, I've seen a lot, and the things that resonate with me the most are the things that I'm going to portray in my music, even though I've seen a lot of things that have nothing to do with it. But no, I just gravitated towards anything new, like any style. I wanted to hear like what it was all about and kind of get inside it and be a very eclectic listener. And I just was naturally, just to say like, oh, these guys are doing this now. There's you can make music just with, by dialing in radio stations and making them play together, and, just like really experimental music too. Or you can have some really symphonic music, just, classical music, stuff like that. So I just felt like I had to have that education to really make something that was very powerful in the end, like what we're doing now, to come to the conclusion to say, all right, I saw that, now I'm just choosing simplicity.
Do you go to college?
I did, but I was a terrible student, so I just the greatest thing that I was taking like music theory, and I was studying like music composition.
Okay.
Because I thought I would be like a film composer if I wasn't gonna make it as a rock star. Then I thought I would go to like UCLA or something and just start doing film scores, because I felt like I knew I could get away with film scores just being more of a pop player, knowing that there had been people like Danny Elfman and people like that came from like rock bands and became great film composers.
Okay. So
that was kind of my backup plan. I thought if I don't...
But this whole thing happened in El Paso at the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, by the time I got to college, I'd been playing music forever, but I just went to music, and I usually just drop classes and skip class, and I just had no interest in really studying what they wanted me to study. The greatest thing that came out of me going to college was our first EP, titled One, the one that has Nothing's Gonna Hurt You, Baby, and all that stuff, was recorded at that college.
What year was this?
2012.
Okay.
And the reason that I was able to record it there is because I'd been there so much. So it's like,
How many years were you there?
I was there forever too. I was like making a career of going to college. I was maybe there for, I don't even want to admit it, but I was there quite a while. Let's just say that.
Well, that happened to Rick Rubin too, back in
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
in New York University. He was in film school as well, and the parents were like, just let him be there, throwing his parties and the whole thing, and he just kind of became a producer by spending too much time in the campus.
It's cool, yeah. I think that was like the Jim Morrison or something too. Like they're just him and like Ray Manzarek were just both like film school dropouts.
Yeah, but your music does have that cinematic intent, and it does sound cinematic and atmospheric and all that stuff. It does take you places. It draws.
That's good to hear that. Yeah, that was definitely. It was intended, and also I think it was just natural because I just love film so much. And just had grown up listening to music, but also just grown up surrounded by movies.
What kind of things were you watching? What kind of movies were you into? Directors and stuff like that?
I think I had like the same education with film too, where I just wanted to see everything. And I was really lucky as a kid because my dad is like working as like a video distributor when I was a kid. So what that means is that like every week we'd get this big box of like VHS tapes delivered to our house, which would be like all the movies that were coming out to rent at like video stores. And we would get like these demo tapes, like promotional copies of like everything. It would be like, there'd be like Jurassic Park in there. There'd be like really cheesy horror movies like Troll 2. There'd be like softcore porn in there. There'd be like, there was kind of like everything was in there. So I would look in this box and you get like complete education on film. You'd get like, and also there'd be classics in there. There'd be like Citizen Kane was reissued. There'd be Disney films like Cinderella was in there or something. And there'd also be foreign films. There'd be like the Three Colors trilogy. So it's crazy. Like just in this one box, you have all of cinema. You have the cheesiest horror movies that I was really into those too. And also the highest art kind of cinema.
When does the band officially start? It starts in 2012, recording that first EP?
It actually starts it's kind of a complicated story. The band starts in 2008 as more of a solo project. But the sound had like almost nothing to do with what it sounds like now. It was kind of just, I feel like I had the personal storytelling part of it. The lyrics were very personal and they were about things I was going through. But the sound was more influenced by, at that time, it was like kind of like really electro pop, like Erasure, New Order, like even like 80s Madonna. Like that was kind of what the sound is like.
Wow.
As time went on, I kind of like started to make the sound kind of catch up with the lyrics, meaning that's when the artwork was like kind of made to be black and white with the Man Ray stuff. The image was there. And then the sound was there with that first EP. So everything before that, I kind of consider this kind of warm-up period, like not even a dress rehearsal, just a kind of like a demo stage. Like I was trying to find my identity, and I finally found it in 2012.
Why do you decide to share that? Because it also happens to independent artists sometimes that they just stay in that comfort zone of being able to do many things at once because that's the way they've been brought up as musicians. The DIY generation has really, exploded right after the whole Napster thing and the whole P2P and MySpace.
Yeah.
But then, they kind of get stuck, maybe into one kind of thing and they just don't move past that.
Yeah.
I guess it takes guts to just say, I'm going to share all that personal stuff and move into a collective kind of thing.
Yeah, it just, like for me, I was just stir crazy. Going back to wanting to seek out so many different things, I was finding in music I was kind of doing that too much. I was like, here's this record and it sounds like this, and then this sounds like something totally different. And I felt like there's no identity there. It was just like it felt like I was just like fooling around with things. And by the time I got to 2012, I said, okay, these are what I was saying earlier. These are the deepest influences to me. The music that I think is the most gorgeous, the most profound to me. Let me just do that now and see what happens. And when I made that choice, that's when the sound arrived, which feels very honest to me because it says I care about this stuff the most, and I think that's gonna get me to the most honest place as a writer, like acknowledging that those are my deepest influences after all this time. Also much later too, I think, because I was older than I think a lot of other people are when they probably reach success in some way. So I felt like I was very slow moving as well. But yeah, it's intriguing.
What happened at that very moment in 2012, what happens for you? What happens for your career? What happens for the band?
Well, to be honest, nothing, nothing happened then. Just like there was no career. It was the profound moment in 2012 was the fact that I found the sound of the band, and but I put the record out and it did absolutely nothing. You know, we actually went on tour that year too with like a lot of the players that played on that first EP, and so. But I knew that I had made something. It almost felt like I had made the first good thing ever in my life musically with that record. And I felt like, okay, something special has finally happened with this. Like before, like I would finish something and then maybe a year later I'd say, I don't like that anymore. I'm just going to delete this and kind of get rid of it. And I was used to that kind of pattern of writing where I would get sick of something. Like, you know, even months later, be like, oh, I'm not into this anymore. Never mind. But with this record, I finished it and I thought, I still love this. And a year would go by and I would say, I really believe in this. This is great. I know that I've done something special now. I really felt that. But nothing had happened. Nothing happened with our career. So I finally moved to New York, knowing that I had to get out of El Paso to kind of find success. I couldn't stay in El Paso. It wasn't going to happen there. It just wasn't like there was no opportunity there. It was a small town.
There's no industry.
No industry,
if you will.
Exactly. Yeah. That's like the best way to put it, I think, even. And New York to me represented the greatest. That was the greatest city as far as artists was New York to me. Like the highest level of artists came out of New York. It was like Dylan, it was Paul Simon, it was Leonard Cohen, it was directors like Scorsese. It was artists like Warhol. It was stuff like that. Like New York was like the place where like just all these artists I admired were from. Lou Reed or whatever. It was like that kind of stuff. So I thought I should go there, and that's where I'll find my place, knowing that I empathize with all these artists so much. So I went there. I went to New York 2013, and I kind of restarted the band with the players that are playing on the records now. And it took 2 years of us in that city playing shows around. Almost out of the blue in 2015, this record from 2012 was discovered on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. Like kind of like almost like accidentally almost. It felt like somehow like the record had gotten into the consciousness a little bit. Like I would start to receive emails from people all over the world, maybe like just a few a month, just saying like, "Oh, this record really helped me."
Does New York work for you? Does it make it happen?
I feel like it did. It felt like it got us there. It got like an awareness of the band name out there because like New York is like the world stage. So if we were just playing shows around, I think people were seeing our name or something all of a sudden. And also like some of the venues there were like really great. Like they had like all these other great bands that were kind of coming up, and we kind of got into that circuit right before the band took off.
How do you make it into that circuit? Do you get help? Do you like a record label or somebody?
I didn't even know how to like. I had like record labels were like a mystery to me back then. It just didn't really like. I really had zero. I was like rarely approached by anyone. Probably like since I was in El Paso. But it was just, for me, it was just always just hustling. It was always like emailing all these people and saying, hey, like I want to play at your venue and we could do this, and just trying to get in there.
How does it happen when you offer yourself to play in those shows? How does everything happen in that wild circuit? Because, do you have to, offer the shows for free, or how does it go?
There was an element of that. I think in New York, they were kind of paying you, but my experience with that was that you just had to have a really good sounding record to kind of get in. And luckily we had the first EP. And so it'd show people that and be like, oh, you guys sound good then. So then why don't you play a show and we'll see how it goes. But we played plenty of shows to like one person too back then in the dead of winter, like the craziest, like you travel, like we were living far away, like from one of the venues that we had to travel like an hour in the snow and play for like one person,
Wow.
So stuff like that. So even playing shows didn't mean anything. Sometimes it just meant like you just got a gig, but no one is going to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, and right after that, when do you guys start getting into TV somewhere around that time? Because I read something about your getting into TV and stuff.
That took a second to happen too. I think that was more of a story going into our first LP, even like more like 2017, where we were picked up by Handmaid's Tale. Was like a big thing where they picked up that, and it became like kind of Seems to have become kind of a bigger cultural moment with that show being such a big thing in modern times.
Yeah.
And people always point to that now, which is great.
Has anyone ever told you to go somewhere in terms of lyrics, in terms of music, in terms of sound? Once you start getting the project off the ground, has anyone done any kind of or sort of A&R for you guys? And
Oh, I see. Not really. I feel like we were really lucky because the band was like its own success story. So we started talking to labels. It was really just like, we don't want to change anything. And if you're up to just strengthen what's there, then we'll work together. But it wasn't like, I'm sure like people have very unpleasant experiences working with labels where they maybe get some small success and the label's like, well, we can make you much bigger, but you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to change your whole thing a little bit. With us, like by the time we signed, we already had done pretty well just because of the YouTube thing. So we were able to kind of have like final cut on things, you know?
yeah,
So, and it's kind of just, it's been that way now too, which is great. And the label we work with now, Partisan, is we work with them because they respect exactly what we're doing and they just want to help make it as strong as possible. They're not trying to change anything, and it feels like a mutual respect.
you picked them because of that.
Exactly. Definitely. We just knew that we didn't want to, like the vision itself had been so worked out in my mind and so cultivated that it felt too personal to kind of just give up to like kind of these big ideas or something like other labels might have.
It's also interesting to see that, you know, how important, I got to go back to the fans, because I do believe that a band who knows its fans is a successful band. But we've mentioned the word success over the course of this conversation for a couple times, maybe 3, and it'd be nice to hear you talk about your vision and your perception of what success is, because back in the 90s or back in the 80s when we grew up listening to records and listening to the radio, being successful for us who were on the other end of the radio meant that, you know, you sold a lot of records, that you sold a lot of albums, that you made it to the #1 spot on the Billboard charts. And nowadays it seems to me like it's such a whole different thing. So what's success for you?
It is interesting what you're saying, that it could mean many different things, meaning that even like bands I listened to at that time were in very different places of success. Like it was, I could listen to some very obscure band and also listen to like the biggest band in the world too, and they're both successful in my mind. Which goes back to my vision of success, which is just very simple, meaning that success to me means that I can be an artist professionally and not have to do anything else. So it's very simple. It's just saying like, my idea of success is that I'm an artist and I get to just make this music that I want to make and share it with the world. Beyond that, success would mean making music that makes a difference to people and that changes the world in a good way.
Yeah, I was thinking about Lou Reed. You mentioned Lou Reed, and I was thinking about how successful he was because he lived a tough life.
It varied a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and he was pretty tortured by many things that probably he didn't have any control over. But then again, you know, you go and look for these obscure Lou Reed records, and you find some sort of success in the way that it connects with you, you know?
Yeah, and it's strange because you think of, like, he's wildly successful in my mind because he created an entire, like, Velvet Underground, it's the fingerprints of that band are on everything that I can really think of, like, of any kind of modern songwriting.
Yeah.
Like most, especially independent music, you know, just, it's all over the place. And even this, he was even influenced like Bowie and stuff like that.
Right.
Back in the day.
And yet, when you mentioned Bowie, I was also thinking about this a few days ago, and it's like, many of the records that Bowie did, you know, they didn't really sell. You know,
Especially, first off.
Yeah, he wasn't really impactful at the very beginning, you know, back in 66, 67, all the way to 73.
He was around for a while, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's like...
Before it.
And yet, and you look back and you listen to many of those albums, and they had that thing where it was so disconnected from mainstream pop in many ways, but at the same time, it just kind of sowed the seeds of what was going to happen.
What's going to happen, yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love his whole 70s run he did. Is like one of the greatest runs of any artist, I think. Like the albums he did in the 70s. It's pretty wild. Just they're so different and so good and so visionary. It's wild. But yeah, going back to success for me, it just means, you know, thinking of someone like Lou Reed that had like, you know, a huge hit with Walk on the Wild Side, but also a lot of his records were very difficult and probably didn't sell very well, you know, going into the 70s, the 80s and everything, 90s. But I just see him as successful because his music impacted the world in a very positive and powerful way.
Does it worry you that it seems as though rock is experiencing sort of a stagnation? Like it's kind of just there. And it's, you know, Alex Turner from the Arctic Monkeys said once that it was going back to the sludge, to the swamp, and things like that, kind of trying to just make up for the fact that young kids aren't that much into it anymore. What do you think of that? What's your take?
I wonder about it, yeah, because when I'm looking for influence too, it's usually not in like modern rock music. I think something happened where it became too like sterilized maybe. And the exciting music is subject matter wise and production wise is like hip hop, you know, in the moment. Hip hop has kind of inherited what rock was. Like hip hop's kind of like in like its grunge phase almost right now or something.
It's hard to define and it's hard to explain that to people here in Colombia. Colombia has a lot of rock fans, and it's hard for them to, when you tell them, you know, that hip hop is the new rock and roll, it's like, oh my God, it's outrage going on all over the place.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Do you dig hip hop? Do you like stuff that's happening in hip hop right now in the US, especially?
Yeah, no, I love it. And I listen to like quite a lot of it. I mean, you know, like there's artists like 21 Savage, there's like Future, even like, was it Migos, stuff like that. The feeling they're getting across is just really intriguing to me. Like it's so like strange and it's very like druggy and like kind of like bizarre and surreal at times too. So I just think it's just the mood of it is great. Like I love that hip hop has gone to this really dark place and it's not like super happy. So yeah, it's very inspiring. I think for this record too, we're definitely influenced by hip hop a lot.
Take me through the process of making this new album.
Our first record was barely going to come out, our self-titled record. This was 2017. We noticed we had like a bit of time off right before we played like Primavera Sound, I think, in Barcelona. We had like a week off or something. So we thought, let's go, you know, record some new music somewhere. Our philosophy towards recording too, since the first EP, has been that you do it on location, you do it live. Like that's like kind of the style of the band has come out of that. The fact that it's done basically live and it's done not in a studio. Like those are two kind of like conspiracies or something. You know?
How do you pull that off?
You have to have really good players. Yeah, you have to have good songs, I think. You can't just show up and just jam whatever. The songs have to be really concise. I think that made me like write simpler songs even, knowing that I was going to bring him in to the band and just say, can you play this song really quick? We're going to record it right now. Going back to jazz, it came from a jazz mentality too, but just knowing that, you know, what I consider one of the greatest records, Kind of Blue, is done pretty much that way. I mean, they did it in the studio, but they just got together and improvised like kind of what the sound is going to be really quickly. So we've done that since that first record, and it seems like we can't kind of not do that. It has to always be on location and pretty much done live. The first EP was done totally live. There was no overdubs at all. Like it was the vocals that I sang were actually those vocals from that night.
So you rehearse these songs over and over again until you get them right, or
no? And that was backwards too. Like on the first EP, we had rehearsed like maybe 2 songs a little bit, and then 2 the band had never heard. One of those songs, "None's Gonna Hurt You, Baby," and I just brought that in. I'd written it like the day of the recording session too. I'd written it like earlier in that day and said, okay, here's the lyrics, here's the song. Okay, let me just show it to the band tonight. And then I just showed it to the band and said, all right, can we play this too? And we just worked the song up in that moment.
What's the band's input in everything that you do, create, write, and compose? And when you present it to the band, what do they say? How do they collaborate or change your mind about something? How does it happen?
It's usually I'm like a super control freak, so it's more about them like executing. Excuse me, like they just instinctually know what to play pretty much. Like there's not a lot of talk that goes on. There's not a lot of let's try this, let's try that. It's kind of just here's the song, and they like I have them as players because they just know what to do. Like there's not a lot of maybe you would do this. They just know. And I've always played with players that play that way, just like gravitating towards people that can just give me something. And the most I'll do is say like if someone's playing something I don't like, I'll just say that's all right, but try something different. I would never want to say play this exact thing to somebody. It doesn't feel right to me.
So how long does it take you to do Cry in this same manner, in this same way? Does it happen equally? Is it the same as it happened with the other albums?
It was a lot like that. It was even a step beyond that where I had like maybe 2 songs going into the session, and a lot of it I just wrote on the spot during the session. I didn't even like show up with the song. The band is all set up. We were recording, and I thought, I don't have a song. Let me write something right now, really quick. And a lot of the songs are written actually that way, where I was just there like, okay, let me see if I can write a song really quick. Almost like a challenge. And within 5 minutes, all right, here's a song. Let's press record and see what happens. So that's the way the record is kind of done very spontaneously over the course of, I think, like 5 nights in Mallorca, Spain. The location for this one was found by the head of our label, Tim Putnam. And basically just off of like me saying, I'd love to record in like kind of an exotic location. What do you think? And he went through finding like these really cool locations. He found this really amazing house that was kind of like an architectural marvel, like just like looked like kind of like just super artistically, gorgeously designed house in the middle of like nowhere.
Where, in New York or?
I'm sorry, this is
Spain.
This is in Spain, still in America, yeah.
So Madrid or Barcelona?
In Mallorca.
Mallorca.
Mallorca,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And we were like near enough to the beach, but the house itself was kind of isolated in the middle of like a desert area with trees all around it and stuff. And I like to record only at night pretty much too. So we just kind of take the day easy. Everyone kind of just relax and do whatever they want. Then around 9 p.m. we would start recording and kind of just record into the stars. How
does the engineering work? Who's in charge of all that? I mean, you say you're a control freak in terms of managing the band and, getting your sound. But what about the engineering and the technical aspects of it? Because it's like it's a different location. It's a different kind of deal. It's probably a different kind of engineering thing.
No, it's true. And the way we did it back then was very like guerrilla style. And I think like one thing I've learned from doing all that is like I probably wouldn't do it that way again because it entailed with the first LP too. I was engineering it, and I was just putting up mics, and it was like it was about speed almost. Like, let's just put up a mic here, mic this. There was like 2 mics on the drums, There was like 1 mic and everything. It's like simplicity, but in the mix, it could make it a little hard because some of the sounds aren't very thought out. Like you could have probably engineered it better, but it was done the same way. We just set up everything, and then I would just put mics on everything. We had a little bit of help from an engineer, but nothing much. It was mostly still me pressing record.
When the process is so spontaneous, do you feel uncomfortable or frustrated that you may or may not have gotten the exact result that you were thinking in your mind once the record is out or once it's done? How does that go about for you?
No, it's all supposed to be a surprise. Like I'm recording this way because I came from a long experience of being a control freak and like recording every instrument myself. And in the end, I felt there was nothing satisfying about that because I would just know, I would have a vision and just execute it. And it was like almost like meaningless almost. Like it was like there was no exploration there.
Kind of mechanical maybe?
Something like that. Like you just think, cool, I'm going to write this exact part and make it sound like this. And you get it. And it like felt flat to me always. The exciting thing was that we would do something kind of, a little daring, and then you would get back these results that you didn't really expect. With this record, it was the same way. Like I didn't expect the record to sound how it sounds. It sounds very like strange to me, and I love how strange it is. Pretty much like how strange it sounds. The hard part is once you have the kind of the initial sound of it, trying to refine that exact sound. That can drive me kind of crazy, where you're trying to just like mix it and you know, I would finish the vocals and stuff like that, and that perfection drove me a little crazy. But the initial sound of it, that I love that, like where it was all instinct. It was just like, it's like taking photographs or something in the moment. Just like you could never recreate that photo. You know.
Do you sit with people outside of the band and listen to the album before you put it out? Does anyone have any input on what is happening in these sessions?
I wouldn't say we did that as much. The most we did was just pretty much take it to get mixed, and then that exposed a lot of new like kind of flaws about it. And it was kind of like we made this to kind of be flawed. Like all the music that we make is actually pretty flawed, I would say. Like, you know, flawed in quotes. So it's a matter of like how flawed can you be happy with?
It's a bit about that exploration as well. You know, those flaws also make the album what it is.
They really do, yeah. And that's coming from that too. That's coming from the jazz thing, like hearing where someone will just play like a bad note, but it'll be like, but you like want that. Like you look forward to that note. You look forward to the mistakes. And there's definitely an element of that in this record. But it's hard too, because you'll hear something and you'll want it to be perfect too. Like your mind is trying to mess with it. But in the end, I think I just have to accept what it was, and that it is a very flawed record. And the beauty of it comes from that, the flaws itself.
What's the show like?
The show is like, I feel like our show is just so stripped down to like nothing too. It's coming from the same thing as the record. And it's very much, we just want to function like basically a classic rock band, just play the songs very simply. Like we've had some kind of visual elements in our shows lately, which I'd like to explore more as we go on and maybe cultivate that.
Like what?
Just like since the band is so static, we've like introduced just kind of like there'll be clips from films that I love, like kind of in this like meditative way, like repeating and things like that. And I'd love to kind of make the show feel a little more transportative, like where we're playing the music, and then like these kind of striking images will come out every so often. I think there's some kind of drama that I want from the show that we haven't really got yet. But our shows right now are very stripped down. It's like it's all about just performance. It's just like we're not trying to do anything crazy and like do anything.
It's still pretty crazy, man. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, you got the Nirvana thing, you got the metal thing, you got the jazz thing, you got the movies.
It's all there.
It's a whole bunch of stuff that you can gather and you can get a really big experience out of beyond the music.
Yeah, beyond the music. And that I know for sure, like even if, you know, we don't sound like any of this metal stuff, it's so ingrained in my personality that it's in there in some way. It's in there, like it's going to come across to the listener or something. There's some like weird X factor, knowing that I have all this influence that's in the music for sure. It's just in there. It's like in the touch of the guitar or the singing or the songwriting. It's just in there in some way. Like it's all there.
It's interesting because it's paradoxical and maybe even a little bit of an oxymoron in the sense that you look for simplicity in areas that are so complex. Movies, jazz. You know, you were talking about Kind of Blue, your favorite album, and it was just 60 years old a couple days ago.
Yeah,
you know, and I was thinking about that, about what you found. Just to make a parenthesis and talk about the 60 years of Kind of Blue, what you found in that album, or what you still find that makes you seek simplicity through complexity, because it really is complex, but you do understand as a listener that those things that are happening in that album in the end tend to be so simple.
It's strange. Like they had to have to make that record. They had to be masters of their instruments. They had to be virtuosos. They had to be masters of concept. And yet they had to take all that away and just be instinctual and just make the simplest thing they could make at that moment. And so that's what I identify with Kind of Blue, is saying that we have this huge scope of influence and technique and things, but to me, like the most special thing is when you kind of take that away and just make something that's very honest and simple, And that's the most powerful thing, is to do that, to just say, what if we apply this mastery of everything else to simplicity? What can we get from that? And it was already there. You just heard Kind of Blue, and to me, it was always such a comforting record. It was almost the fact that it was so comforting to me in high school that I would put it on, and it would just like, whatever I was going through emotionally, it was always the medicine for that.
3 last questions before we go. Right now in Bogota, when is it Bogota? Tomorrow night?
Tonight and tomorrow.
Tonight and tomorrow night, 2 nights. Then after that, where are you off to?
And then, that's a great question. It's always the hardest question. It's like I have to like look at
Brazil.
we'll be in Sao Paulo, we'll be in Buenos Aires, we'll be in Lima, and we're going to Uruguay. Kind of.
How did the El Paso thing hit you?
It felt very distressing because I was saying El Paso to me, like, it was so peaceful. Like, I feel like the music that I'm making, well, it has to be a result of, just the peaceful childhood I had, where it just, El Paso is just this very gentle, peaceful place. So to kind of see news that something, this horrible could happen, like in a place like that, it felt, it feels like a nightmare. It feels like it's not true or something, like it didn't really happen. So it's just very distressing and very, very sad to know that that's part of the history now. But it's such a great community of people and such like a wonderful place that it's not gonna, it'll just be, it'll shine through.
Are you optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the best when I'm being optimistic. And it's the music, to me, the music is all about positivity in a lot of ways. And whenever I'm negative, I feel like it's just not, it doesn't suit me. And positivity has like gotten me through the worst. And also in the best times made me realize how great the good times were too.
Will you go out and vote?
If I can, it's every time there's an election, we're like always on tour. I think we were like in Tel Aviv last time or something, so we couldn't even vote. But I've been voting since I was a kid, so yeah.
Cry's coming out on October 23rd.
Something like that, 25th maybe. It's like 25th? I think it's a Friday. But yeah.
All the best with Cry. It's a great album. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Sure, yeah.
All the best with the Latin American tour. It's great meeting you.
My pleasure. Yeah, so great to meet you.
Take care.
Nice. Thanks.
Este programa fue financiado a través de los recursos del Fondo para el Desarrollo de la Televisión y los Contenidos de la Autoridad Nacional de Televisión.